Just before we get started, let me tell you about today's legendary sponsor, and that would be Ridge Wallet. Look, are you tired of carrying around a chunky wallet that doesn't cut it? I've talked about it before on these adverts. I'll bring it in someday. It's this giant old leather wallet that I literally bought it from a discount store when I was 18. I'm now 35, and I carried it around for a good 15 years. Before I switched to Ridge, I threw out all the old receipts, I threw out all the old library cards that I never used, I took the bank cards that I used, I took my driver's license and I stuck it in here. That's 3 cards, it can hold 12. Just in case you're Elon Musk or somebody, got lots of credit cards. I don't know, what are you up to? And then also cash in the bag. Easy does it. Plus it blocks RFID, so no digital pickpockets. Then let's also talk about the key case, which I have down here. I use this for my work keys. You put them on here, you unscrew it, then you put the keys in like a little thing. You put all the holes next to each other and you screw it shut. It's super easy. I think they even provide the little screwdriver thing. And then you just put them in here, and I just basically ordered it. So the keys are in the order that I need them when I get to the office. Outside lock, top lock, bottom lock, and then the back door key. But I don't really need that one. It's just on there so I don't lose it. Look, it's just better. It's less jangly and horrible. It's even got this clip thing, which I guess you could use to attach to a belt or something, but I don't know, I just keep it in my pocket like a normal person. Probably shouldn't say that. It's how I use it, okay, Ridge? So, upgrade your wallet, upgrade your keys today with Ridge. And remember, it's got a lifetime warranty and a 99-day test drive guarantee, so you really can't go wrong. And the best part, Ridge is celebrating their 10-year anniversary, so you can get up to 40% off your purchase. Check out their best offers by using my unique link, that's ridge.com/shadows, and get up to 40% off your purchase through March 26th. Again, ridge.com/shadows. And now back to today's video. If you're not up on your Latin, decimation probably doesn't mean what you think it does. If your first thought was total destruction or near annihilation, well, you're wrong. If you guessed forcing 90% of your own army to cudgel the remaining 10% to death, shooting 1 in 10 men based on the color of a bean, or imposing a nice low 10% income tax, congratulations. Basically, any situation involving the removal of 1/10 of something, be it money or actual human lives, is decimation. Any more than that, and it's just a plain old massacre. The word decimate originates from the Latin decimatus, meaning the removal of the 10th. It was invented by the Romans as a way of murdering a random selection of their own troops, and it stands as one of the most brutal and heartless punishments they inflicted, which is saying something. In fact, even the Romans considered decimation so morally corrupt that it was rarely used and reserved for only the greatest crimes: desertion, cowardice, espionage, and mutiny. To conduct a decimation, all offenders would be gathered and split into groups of 10. Then each group would draw lots. This was usually done with straw, hence the term drawing the short straw, but small grey and white stones worked too. The man who found himself with the shortest straw or different coloured pebble would then be killed by the other 9. Most often, death came in the form of frustarium, a Roman term meaning to be beaten to death with clubs. It was a slow, painful, and shameful way to die. However, many other methods have been used since, including stoning, hanging, and stabbing. The surviving 90% were then evicted from their settlement and forced to camp outside, exposed and unprotected. They were also fed rations of raw barley that was extremely unpalatable, difficult to digest, and usually only kept to be fed to livestock. This provided an extra dose of humiliation and would continue for several days. Physically, it may seem as though decimation was a reasonably mild punishment. I mean, no one was physically burned or flayed alive, but psychologically, it was devastating. The men were forced under the threat of death to murder their friends. These were people they'd camped with and fought beside for months, and many considered them brothers. Then, after the killing, they'd have to recommit themselves to the service of the commander who'd ordered it. However, decimation advocates argued that it was an act of mercy, as commanders were executing only 10% of their men rather than the whole unit. Plus, tactically speaking, it was a great way of disciplining and terrorizing an entire legion or cohort without weakening your overall force by more than 10%. The first documented decimation was recorded by the Roman historian Livy. He wrote that in 471 BC, Appius Claudius Sabinus Regilensis, a Roman senator with a known disgust for the plebeians, was given command of a Roman army and sent to fight the Volsci. However, his soldiers detested him, refused to attack, and he ended up retreating in shame. Once what was left of the army made it back to Roman territory, Appius decided that to make an example of the insubordination, only the harshest punishment would do. So he ordered that any man who dropped their weapon or standard while fleeing be flogged and beheaded. Then he inflicted decimation on the remaining men regardless of their status, reputation, or role in the defeat. The punishment, although effective at instilling fear and obedience, proved to be too cruel to catch on, and aside from one notable use by Alexander the Great against a corps of 6,000 men, it was barely mentioned in the literature for the next few hundred years. The practice of decimation might have been lost to history if it hadn't been for Spartacus, a former gladiator and one of the leaders of the slave revolt that began in 73 BC. The conflict, known as the Third Servile War, started when 70 slave gladiators, armed with kitchen equipment including choppers and spits, escaped from a gladiator school in Capua. Who would have thought that training your criminals and prisoners of war to be elite fighters would be a bad idea? The slave army, with several leaders including Spartacus, spent their time raiding estates and towns, recruiting rebel slaves, and resisting all Roman military attacks. In one event, they were besieged in their defensive position on Mount Vesuvius by 3,000 men under the command of Gaius Claudius. Rather than rush into attack, Gaius chose to trap them on the mountain and starve them out. However, Spartacus's men were clever. They made ropes and ladders from vines and trees, rappelled down the cliffs, and outflanked the Romans. In 71 BC, having resisted all efforts of recapture, they'd recruited 120,000 men to their cause and had become a threat to Rome itself. This alarmed the Senate, and the defeat of the slave army was assigned to Marcus Licinius Crassus, a general known for his harsh but effective leadership style. By this point, the thought of facing Spartacus's army brought terror to the Roman soldiers, and after an early defeat, Crassus felt it necessary to impress upon them that he was more dangerous than their enemy. And what better way to instill fear than to revive decimation? Reports vary as to exactly how many of his own men he executed, but he did it more than once, and most estimates place the toll somewhere between 500 and 4,000, which would amount to him decimating his entire army. Unfortunately for the ex-slaves, decimation worked. The soldiers were brought into line, and Crassus was able to defeat Spartacus at the Battle of Salarius River. This ended the revolution, Spartacus was killed, and Crassus earned the position of consul. Crassus's use of decimation became so infamous and terrifying that its mere mention was enough to bring troops into line. This was demonstrated by Julius Caesar, who famously used the threat of decimation to prevent the Ninth Legion's mutiny during the Great Roman Civil War. According to the histories of Appian, following Caesar's announcement, quote, "Straight away a cry went up from the whole legion, and the officers threw themselves at Caesar's feet in supplication." Myths have grown around the event, with some accusing him of going through with it. However, most experts agree that it was nothing more than an empty threat designed to scare the legion into obedience. When the officers begged for mercy, Caesar offered it, conceding to decimate just the 120 ringleaders. He then rigged the drawing of lots, and only 12 of the most guilty were actually executed. This earned him the winning combination of both fear and gratitude from his troops. However, a few leaders did follow through on their threats. According to Plutarch, a 35 BC defeat to the Parthians left Mark Antony so enraged that he ordered decimation on all who'd played the coward. Emperor Augustus, Emperor Galba, and Lucius Apronius also inflicted decimation upon their troops. Emperor Macrinus was another supporter, but in the spirit of killing fewer of his own men, he invented centesimatio, where only 1 in every 100 was executed. However, even watered down, decimation wasn't a particularly fashionable practice, and it's been noted that, quote, its appeal was to those obsessed with nimio amore antiqui moris, that is, an excessive love for ancient customs. Unfortunately, though, the worst decimation was yet to come. By far the most horrific decimation occurred in the 3rd century AD. Egyptian-born Maurice, a soldier in the Roman army, had risen to become commander of the Theban legion. He and the rest of his men were Christians, while at the time the Roman Empire was pagan. This didn't matter too much while they were in Thebes. Unfortunately, though, they were called to Gaul to assist Emperor Maximian against a revolt, and it was there that they ran into trouble. First, the emperor demanded that Maurice and his troops make sacrifices to the pagan gods, and they refused. Then, the legion was ordered to harass the local Christians, and again, they declined. Maximian was so outraged by the insubordination that he ordered decimation. This time, though, it didn't work. The surviving soldiers still refused to attack their fellow Christians, so a second decimation was ordered. And again, it failed. And Maximilian continued until every one of the 6,000-strong Theban legion had been executed. In recognition of their martyrdom, Maurice became a patron saint. The site of the slaughter, Agarnum, in Switzerland, was renamed Saint Maurice, and an abbey was constructed in their honor. Unsurprisingly, the annihilation of an entire legion by decimation wasn't great for PR, and the punishment fell out of use. Soon the word drifted from its original meaning and applied to the far less bloody, but equally unpopular subject of taxes. The first written example comes from St. Jerome's translation of the Old Testament for his Vulgate Bible, where he wrote, Qui decimus accipit decimates, meaning he who received tithes pays tithes, referring to a 10% tax. Eventually, in the 6th century, decimation, the murder one, not the tax one, was banned by Emperor Maurice in his war manual, the Strategicon. He argued that any punishment where the rank and file saw their comrades dying by the hands of their own brothers in arms could lead to a collapse in morale. Plus, the loss of manpower was also a serious concern. Commanders eager to give decimation a go, but worried about reducing their own forces, occasionally used it on enemy prisoners. In December 1942, during the Texan War of Independence, 308 Texan soldiers attempted to capture the town of Ciudad Maya. Unfortunately for them, they'd missed the fact that 3,000 Mexican troops were already in the area, and the Battle of Maya broke out. Despite being drastically outnumbered, the Texans killed 650 before they were captured, leaving the Mexicans more than just a little bit pissed off. The 243 Texan prisoners were marched toward Mexico City, and on the way, 181 managed to escape into the Mexican desert. 176 were recaptured after running out of food and water, but by this point, Mexican General Santa Anna had thoroughly had enough of them and ordered all escapees to be killed. U.S. foreign ministers pleaded for mercy, and so it was decided, rather than execute all 176, they'd be subject to decimation in what would become known as the Black Bean Incident. 159 white beans and 17 black beans were placed in a pot to be drawn from by all officers and then enlisted men. The Mexicans attempted to rig the draw by adding the black beans on top and calling the officers first, assuming that they'd be more likely to draw a black. However, the first men figured this out and plunged their hands into the bottom to pull out a white bean, so the pot was vigorously shaken, evening the odds. Well, mostly. One man, William A. Wallace, aka Bigfoot, stood close to the draw and noted that the black beans were larger, and so he felt around for the smallest, and he lived. The first man to draw a black was Major James D. COCKE, whose last words were, "Tell my friends I die with grace." 16 were executed on the 25th of March, 1843. The 17-year-old James Shepherd received a musket to his cheek and arm, but survived by playing dead and escaping into the night. However, 4 days later, he was recaptured, and this time he was killed. Though it remains rare, decimation continued into the 19th and 20th centuries. President Lopez ordered it during the Paraguayan War for the 10th Battalion, who fled the Battle of Curazao without firing a single shot. During the First World War, the French decimated their mixed Algerian infantry regiment with a firing squad for failing to stand and fight in what was considered a suicide mission, and Italy employed decimation after the mutiny of the 141st Infantry Brigade. The last confirmed decimation occurred in 1918 during the Finnish Civil War fought between the anti-socialist whites and the socialist Reds. After the fighting broke out, the community of Varkas was left as the last remaining red spot in white territory. The whites' first attempt to take it failed, so they returned a few weeks later with 1,000 men. The Reds had 1,200, but only 150 of them were armed, and they resorted to constructing a homemade cannon in the local metalworks. After 2 days of fighting, the Reds ran out of ammunition and surrendered. But rather than taking them all as prisoners, the whites chose to make an example out of them. Around 700 Reds were marched to nearby Hurashlati Bay and forced to line up in a single file on the ice. Then the leaders and every 10th prisoner was shot. Onlookers nicknamed it the Lottery of Hurashlati due to the random nature of the killings, but the whites later claimed they selected each victim based on their rank. Either way, 10% were murdered in the decimation. Legally speaking, this was a war crime, but there was a loophole. The newly independent state of Finland had not yet signed any treaties on the laws of war, and general amnesty laws adopted after the war meant no one was ever brought to justice for the massacre. Happily, it's now been over 100 years since decimation was last used in conflict. Unhappily, it seems like just as long since it was last applied to taxes. Today, we use the term technically incorrectly to describe something that's been devastated or destroyed, and the only fighting involved is between grammar enthusiasts online and by one Twitter user who #GotDumped because I insisted she learn that decimate means to reduce by a tenth. It doesn't mean wiped out, Vicky. Although that Twitter user apparently doesn't realize that language evolves.